Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 3 of the Ultimate Job Search and Career Podcast. And I am your host, Bill, the company's expert. And today we're going to talk about how to answer a couple of job interview questions. In particular, the first thing that people ask you when you get to the job interview, the big opening question, tell me about yourself. And we're also going to answer a question that was sent in by a viewer. They were wondering, what's the best answer when they ask you to describe your learning style or your work style? Okay, so we're going to cover those. And I'm not just going to give you the answer to the question. We're also going to talk about what the recruiter or hiring manager or indeed any interviewer is thinking when they ask these questions. What's their motive? What answer are they looking for? How they think and how they judge your responses. So that's what we're going to get into today. So if this is the first time you're tuning into my podcast, the usual home of my podcast is my secondary channel, The Company's Expert 2, which I invite you to subscribe to. But occasionally I'll be putting these podcasts on my main channel, The Company's Expert, just for the sheer hell of it. So hopefully you enjoy. If I'm going to kick back and have a sip of Diet Pepsi, because Diet Pepsi is the drink of champions. You might not know this, but it's true. Yes, many great thinkers throughout history have also drunk Diet Pepsi, and that kind of is a sign of how great it is. So, first topic for today is how to answer, tell me about yourself. Now, I've done several videos on this on my channel, and if you've seen those, the short answer is when somebody asks you, tell me about yourself, the answer I recommend is the first thing you say, which is more of a memory jog for you than a derogatory comment to anyone. But it's, as you can see from my resume, and then you go down the material on your resume in 45 seconds. So you don't spend a lot of time on it, but you just give a good summary. And then you start with the oldest material and you end with the newest material. And then you end your answer by saying, and that's what brings me here today and why I'm excited to learn more about this opportunity. Okay, that's the answer I recommend. Now let's get into this. Why would I say this? And what's going on with the recruiter when they ask you this question? Okay, first of all, the thing about job interviews is that usually the way it works is that recruiters and hiring managers, whoever is in charge of the recruitment and selection for the position, okay, they get a list of applications, they get a stack of applications, and they shortlist the candidates that they're going to bring in for an interview. Now, in the vast majority of these situations, the people that are shortlisted to actually do a job interview are candidates that essentially meet all the requirements. Okay, so if they've stated in their job posting that they are looking for certain things, okay, maybe they give you a list of approximately 10 to 20 requirements. They'll say, we're looking for someone with these skills, with these traits, with these educational qualifications. And you send in a resume, you sometimes accompanied by an actual job application, which is sort of like a form you fill out. And the candidates that are shortlisted to be brought in for an interview, usually in the vast majority of cases, like 98% of the time, all those candidates will have met the essential requirements for the position. So that means that on paper, when it comes to their qualifications, assuming that their application doesn't contain any falsehoods, they haven't lied, all those candidates could do the job. Now, the problem that recruiters and hiring managers have is that you can't hire all these people. You have to narrow it down to one person. Only one person can get the job. So you're looking essentially to eliminate most of the people that you bring in for an interview, and you're going to be left with one candidate at the end, one person still standing, and that's who you offer the job to. Okay, so essentially it's an elimination game. Okay, now it doesn't make sense for a recruiter to bring someone who is on paper, they are not qualified to do the job, to a job interview. Okay, it just doesn't make any sense to do this. So the fact that you've been called in for an interview, that signals that as far as they're concerned, you seem to be qualified to do the job. If they were to offer you the job, it appears that you would be able to do it. Okay, so you are a contender. Now, what this means is essentially all you have to do is not talk yourself out of the job. Okay, they're going to see if they can eliminate you. Okay, and there's several ways they can do this. The first way, obviously, is if there's some kind of red flag with you. So let's say they bring you down to the interview and you get very agitated and hostile by their questions. Okay, so there's just something off with your behavior. Now, that would be something that wouldn't show up in a job application, but it would show up when they interview you. Okay, so that would get you eliminated. And what they're going to do is they're going to try and search for red flags. They're going to probe and they're going to dig to see if they can find any red flags. Okay. And they're going to, if they do find any of these red flags, they'll probably eliminate you simply based on those. They won't investigate you any further. They'll just eliminate you from the running and focus on other candidates. Okay. Another reason that they could eliminate you is not necessarily red flags, but things that would indicate that you would be a high-risk applicant, okay, a high-risk candidate. So, for example, let's say that a good example would be if they call your references and they say, your previous bosses, previous coworkers, and they say, yeah, I don't know, I really don't enjoy working with this person. They have a bad temper and, they tend to be disrespectful and things like this. That would count as a red flag. And what that would suggest is that you would be a higher risk candidate. So it seems like you could do the job, and there's nothing to eliminate you from being able to do the job. But if they hire you, they would be taking a greater risk because it suggests that the chances of this candidate working out would be lower. Okay. So that's kind of the other reason they could eliminate somebody. And then sort of the final big reason that they could eliminate somebody is that there's maybe one candidate that has a lot of charisma, that when they interview that person, it's not that that person is more qualified or less risky than anyone else, but they just really, really like that candidate. They click on a personal level. The candidate has the right attitude. They seem to be someone that most people would want to work with and most people would enjoy working with. Okay, so if you're not that candidate, then they can eliminate you simply based on that. Okay, so this is kind of the situation. It's a very delicate situation. It's not based really on who is the most qualified in absolute terms. It's a matter of making it through this elimination process. Okay. So we return to the question, tell me about yourself. When you arrive in the job interview, usually this question is the very first thing they ask you in a job interview. And it's supposed to sort of set the rhythm of the interview. It allows you to make an introduction to yourself and introduce yourself. And for that reason, this is a very popular question. This question is such a cliche. It's such a cookie cutter question. Everybody expects this question. And this question has been asked for many, many decades as the opening question in a lot of job interviews. So it's a known quantity and it's such a cliche. And what I find interesting is that this question, it's strange. It's like nobody would really use tell me about yourself in a casual conversation. I don't think. That's my personal opinion. I mean, I've never met somebody at a social function or been introduced to somebody, and the first thing they say is, so tell me about yourself. I've never gotten that. I've never heard of anyone being asked that in the real world. It seems to be a very artificial thing to say. And one of the reasons why is because it's such a general question. You know, when somebody says, tell me about yourself, a lot of people who are not prepared for job interviews, who don't have a lot of experience being interviewed, they might be tempted to answer in a whole variety of different ways. For example, if someone said, tell me about yourself, you could answer with, well, let's see. I'm 5'10". This is my weight. This is my blood type. This is my shoe size. And, give a lot of physical attributes. I mean, that would be technically an answer to tell me about yourself, right? Another answer would be, what are your hobbies? You could answer with, well, in my spare time, I like to hunt wolverines, and I like to read romance fantasy novels. And when I was a child, I used to draw a lot of pictures of Alice in Wonderland. You could answer this as a answer to tell me about yourself, and it wouldn't be off base to answer this way. And a lot of introverted people, a lot of people that are either unprepared for job interviews or they are not experts at social interaction, they may well answer this way. And you know what? I agree with them because, you are technically answering the question asked of you. Now, obviously, those are not the way we would answer this question in a job interview, okay? When the job interview starts, as a lot of people know who have done job interviews, and those of you that are new to job interviews, so begins the most artificial exchange of your professional life. People, this is probably the furthest thing away from a casual conversation with a friend that you can get. It's a dog and pony show. It's a dance, and it's done with the express object of trying to eliminate you from the running. That's what the recruiter and hiring manager is attempting to do with this question, and indeed all the questions are going to be asked in the job interview. Okay, so that's what's going on here. Okay, so they're looking for red flags. They're looking for things that would indicate that you would be a risky candidate, okay? And they are looking to see if they like you, okay? So those are kind of the three main things that are really going on behind the scenes, okay? Now, I'm speaking from the perspective of somebody that's been to many job interviews and has conducted many job interviews. And that's what's going on. Now, just on a personal note, I never ask, tell me about yourself, because of the reasons I've stated. It's extremely artificial, and there are better ways of getting to know people. But this is kind of a cliched thing that you're going to encounter, so it's good to know how to answer it. Okay. So now I gave my recommended answer, which was, you say, well, as you can see from my resume, and you go down your resume, 45 seconds, oldest stuff to newest stuff, and then you end with, and that's what brings me here today, and that's why I'm excited to learn more about this opportunity. Okay, now why do I say that? Well, here's the deal. When the interviewer is trying to eliminate you, you have no idea what the criteria is that they could use to eliminate you. And I've seen some pretty weird elimination criteria. Okay. You don't have to take this from me. You could basically go to any person that gives advice on how to pass a job interview, and they will tell you ridiculous stories they've heard about how recruiters have eliminated candidates. Now, the example I always use, which is something I've witnessed, is that a hiring manager may be a fan of a certain sports team. And if you let it slip quite innocently that you're a fan of the opposing sports team, you can get eliminated based on that. And the justification is that, well, we wouldn't really fit as people. It's that level of ridiculousness that you could be up against. So the reason I recommend that you stick to material on your resume is simply because the material on your resume has already been seen by the interviewer. Okay, you used it to apply for the job, and based on the strength of your resume and your application, they still brought you in for a job interview. So you can safely conclude that there was nothing on your resume that would have eliminated you right off the bat. Okay, so for that reason, you can consider the material on your resume safe. Okay, so saying it as an answer to this question, for example, should not get you eliminated. Okay, this is making some assumptions. It's making the assumption that they've read your resume. Okay. But it's a pretty safe assumption. Now, the alternative is to start talking off the top of your head, giving them information that is not on your resume. And the danger with that is that you're in unknown territory. And just like the sports team example, you could say something perfectly innocent that you think is perfectly benign, but unbeknownst to you, they have a problem with it and they use it to eliminate you. So for that reason, I say stick to material that's on your resume. Okay. Now, I just want to add a footnote here. It's funny because I believe I have two main videos up on my regular YouTube channel, The Company's Expert, that talk about how to answer this question. And on both videos, I occasionally get recruiters who comment and they say, I would never accept someone, repeating their resume. Yeah, exactly. It's because they're probing for something else. They're probing for something that will eliminate you. And I get recruiters saying things like, well, when I ask, tell me about yourself, I want you to talk about your ambitions and your work style. And I just laugh at that because it's like, well, if that's what you're asking, then you need to spell it out, because you know what? The candidate is not a mind reader. And there are about 1 to 2 million different possible answers to tell me about yourself. So you need to be more specific. If you are asking a specific question, then you need to spell it out. You can't say, tell me about yourself, and then the person gives an answer, and then you say, well, I'm sorry, that's not the answer I was looking for. I was looking for your shoe size. Now, obviously that's ridiculous, but that's essentially what people are doing. If you have a specific question, if you're trying to probe for somebody's ambitions, or you're trying to probe for somebody's work style, communication style, if you're trying to probe to see if they collaborate with people readily, or you're trying to probe to see if they have training and formal training in how to make business decisions, or whatever you're probing for, you need to spell it out, because asking a general question and expecting people will pick up on the precise thing you're fishing for is ridiculous. And to candidates that are listening to this, I gotta say, I mean, if that's what if the person that's interviewing you, that's what they're expecting, then there's no pleasing them. There's no intuitive way to pass this test. Okay. So the best thing you can do as a candidate is you can reduce the riskiness of your answers. And I've had, for every recruiter that's complained and said, well, that's silly. I would eliminate someone who just repeats their resume to me. Well, you need to be more specific. For every one of those people, I have 50 people telling me that, this was a great answer. I used your answer in an interview and I passed. So go figure. Anyway, so that's the answer to tell me about yourself. Now, the reason why the other thing that's going on here in this question, tell me about yourself, is what you don't want to do is you don't want to take up 10 minutes of the interview describing something you did 10 years ago that has nothing to do with this job that you're interviewing for. It's taking away from time, from the opportunities you have to sell yourself, to give them reasons to hire you. Your sole purpose in a job interview is to give them reasons to hire you. Okay. And if you find yourself talking about something other than this, you're talking about what you did in another job 3 years ago, it has nothing to do with this job. It has nothing to do with communicating to these interviewers how you meet the requirements and how you'd be a great fit for this job. If that's what you find yourself talking about, you're off track. Okay. You need to get off those non-relevant topics and get back to selling yourself, to giving them reasons why they need to pick you. Okay. So that's why I say, when you answer, tell me about yourself, and you start giving them your work history and your education, you need to keep it to 45 seconds. 45 seconds is a reasonable amount of time to answer a question. It's not too brief, but it doesn't drag on and take up an inordinate amount of interview time. Okay. And the other reason why I say you need to start with your oldest material and then explain your work history and everything in chronological order and come up to the latest material is because you're going to end by saying what? What was it? The last line is, and that's what brings me here today, and that's why I'm excited to learn more about this opportunity. You want to get back to talking about this job. So then you can say, well, yes, I have that. And yes, I'm qualified. And yes, I enjoy doing that, right? That's what you're there at the job interview to do. Okay. So that gives some reasoning behind this answer. Okay. That's what's going on. So there we go. So hopefully that makes sense. It's interesting because just before we leave this topic entirely, I just want to say, this is, like I mentioned, one of the cliched job interview questions. It is completely unoriginal to ask this question. It is pretty much the most cliched question in the entire repertoire of recruiters when they do a job interview. It's like doing job interview 101. They'll ask you, tell me about yourself. They'll ask you, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And then they'll ask you, why should we hire you? These are such cliched questions. And you can expect some form of them. And basically what they're doing is they're sort of the idiot's guide to job interviewing. They are a pseudo replacement for actually having a real conversation to get to know the other person. Right? Like, for example, let's say you meet somebody, just in public. You happen to be ordering a coffee together or waiting for a bus together or something like that. I mean, very rarely do you start the conversation by saying, so talk about you now. It's just a very artificial way to try and start a conversation and get to know the other person. And it's been written into HR handbooks for many, many years. And it's been accepted practice to do this for many, many years. And so a lot of people that learn HR and they take a certificate in HR, which I have taught at universities, they learn this stuff. And I understand the reason why they learn it. But the bottom line is that this stuff is really not effective. And the fact that I can tell you a canned answer to these questions and have you pass these questions is kind of a testament to how ineffective they are. But this is, for better or worse, this is the format of an interview that most people are going to encounter. So it's best to know how to get through it. Okay, so moving on. Now, I received a comment by a viewer on my channel who left a comment. This is, I'm probably not going to say this correctly, but this is Whale Kenus, Wail Kenus. And Whale says, quite helpful. Could you make another video on how would you describe your learning/work style? And then Whale writes, team versus independent. Okay. So this is kind of two different questions here. How would you describe your learning style? And how would you describe your work style? These are two questions that you have potential to be asked in a job interview. Now, the question is, how do you answer these? Well, let's talk about the first one first. Okay, so if you're in a job interview and somebody asks, how would you describe your learning style? Okay, this is a perfectly legitimate question, especially if the job that you're going for requires you to learn on the job, which is the vast majority of jobs. Okay, they could well ask you this. Now, if you're in an academic type environment, okay, let's say you're applying to be, a teaching assistant or, or lecturer, something like that. They could ask you this and there'd be a very academic answer you could give. You could list off the common types of learning. Okay. Now, just going from memory here, you could be a visual learner, you could be an auditory learner, or you could be a kinesthetic tactile learner, I believe. As I recall, those were like kind of the three main types of learning, right? Now, that's if you're speaking, from an educational perspective here. How do children learn? How do adults learn? What's the best way of getting them to absorb and retain information, right? Now, if this was more of a functional job type interview, it has nothing to do with education. You're being hired to be a project manager or something like this. Okay. If someone asks you, how would you describe your learning style? Okay. You could maybe go into, instead of these academic sort of learning styles, you could state, visual learner, auditory learner, tactile learner. But what might be more useful there is for you to demonstrate your practical knowledge. If you have had a job before, if you had a career type job before in the same vein as the one you're applying for, you could talk about how you have learned a lot of the practical knowledge of how to do that job. So for example, okay, if I was asked this question in an interview, I would say, well, what's my learning style? Well, what I like to do is, one thing I like to do is if the learning in question is a particular process, okay, how to do a particular task in my role as a project manager. Well, what I would do is I like to borrow some principles from Lean. I like to go to the Gemba. I like to go to the place the work is done, and I like to see every step of the process for myself. Once I see it and I can visualize what this involves, then I can internalize how I can internalize that step of the process. And then I know that I will retain it for a very long time if I've actually seen it. Okay. But after I go and I observe the process, I then like to analyze it. So either in the form of reading, if reading material is available, or for being able to do it myself. Okay, if this is a process that I'm going to be expected to actually perform, I like to be able to do every single step. And that gives me an empirical understanding of what's involved. Okay. And in general, that would be my learning style. Something like that. Obviously, this is going to vary. There's not really a cookie cutter response for this question that's going to fit every possible situation. But that would be a good answer. If they ask you a very general question, that's a reasonably general response that can be adapted depending on what job you're going for and what they're referring to. Okay. So that takes care of how would you describe your learning style. Okay. Now, the question that our good friend Whale Kenus asked is, he said, the question they would like answering is, how would you describe your work style? Okay. Now that's a completely different question from how would you describe your learning style? Okay. So your work style, he gives in brackets here, team versus independent. Okay. Now here's the deal. I think for most people that go to job interviews and hold down jobs, you are capable of both. Okay. You are capable of working as a team to a certain degree, and you are capable of working independently to a certain degree. We're talking very general questions here, and I think that everybody can do both of those to some extent. Now, I would recommend that when you answer this, you tailor your answer to what you expect them to be looking for in the role that you're applying to. Okay. So for example, if you know that you're going to be working as part of a team, and that's the nature of the job, and they've stated this explicitly in the job posting, then if they ask you, could you describe your work style? Or, do you work as a team or do you work independently? I would say, well, I work as a team. And presumably you've had some experience in your life working as part of a team. Even if that's, washing the dishes as a member of your family when you were a child 10 years ago at home, you will be able to, give proof that you understand how to work as a team. You do a division of labor, you make it clear that, okay, this is my piece of the puzzle and I'm responsible for it. Okay. And then you perform your task and you make sure that you have a good working relationship with everybody else on the team so that the entity can flow and things get done. Okay. If there's some kind of confusion or dispute over what the roles are, you wish to have those resolved as soon as possible. And you do that by working with people and, asking them, first of all, how are we doing this? And if nobody has a ready solution to it, you make suggestions. Well, maybe I'll do this and you do that. Does that work for you? So basically giving details, giving evidence that you understand how to work as a team would be good if you know that they're looking for a person that is expected to work in a team. On the other hand, if the job is more independent work, you're going to be working solo, you're going to be working by yourself, and you're going to have certain responsibilities, and you're expected to take care of them yourself without looking to somebody else to give you permission to do every little thing and to authorize every little thing and to tell you how to do every little thing. If you know, on the other hand, that is the nature of the role you're applying to, you could say, well, I like to work independently. The great thing about being independent is that there's no confusion as to who is doing what. I know what I have to do, and I enjoy, taking on responsibility, and I'm accountable for it. And that allows me to get on with doing my job. I like that because I don't have to interoperate with a bunch of people. And if I'm part of a team of 7 people, that means I have to make sure that the other 6 people are okay with everything and that they approve of everything and they give me permission to do everything and they're satisfied with how everything's going. That really slows it down. I like being able to take charge, being able to get things done, and I enjoy it when I'm accountable for my particular sphere of responsibility. That would be an acceptable answer when they ask you in a very general sense, are you okay working independently? Okay. So long story short, if they ask you these questions, like how would you describe your learning style or your work style? I would tailor your answer to what you believe the job is looking for. I would indicate that you can do both, and I would give some evidence of how you would do whichever one it is that they're looking for. Okay, so that's how I recommend you answer these questions. So hopefully that makes sense. I want to thank Whale Kenus for sending in this question. If ever you guys have any questions or any specific job interview questions or elements of getting hired or getting promoted or finding job opportunities or career-related questions, please leave them in the comments under the video. And if they don't have a very short answer, like if they have a very short answer, I can type that out and I answer people's questions. If they don't have a short answer, I can answer them on the podcast. And then I can explain. So that makes sense. So thank you very much to everybody who sent in questions. Thank you very much for listening. Don't forget to check out my courses. I have a course called Get Hired, where I go through absolutely everything that you need to know to not only find job opportunities other than things that are publicly posted, but how to get job interviews, how to pass job interviews, and how to get hired. So if you're interested in that, please see the comments or please see the description of this video, and there'll be a link to that. I encourage you to check it out. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to subscribe. And if you do like this broadcast, make sure you subscribe to both my channels, The Company's Expert and The Company's Expert 2, where my podcasts usually are. So thank you very much. You guys are awesome, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care.